never seen anyone do that before. What tuning is it? Out of tune.
So you can put in your Twitter and then quote.
Yeah, I'll quote you.
Nick Benjamin says out of tune.
Auto tune. Yeah, you have auto tune and you have auto tune.
Yeah. No, that's something better.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay.
Ready?
Okay, ready. Let's just go for it. Hey Nick.
Yes.
So it's really, it's really, like you said, it's very surreal for me to be back here after so many years. The last time I was here was 2013. 2013. Yeah. Oh my god, it's such a long time ago. And the first time I met you was actually 2003.
Is it 2003?
Yes.
So was it in Devon? Was it in Devon?
It was in Devon.
Yeah.
It was Eric's.
Was it in that hotel with the strange?
Yeah, the strange hotel.
The strange hotel.
The strange
the
hotel.
Abandoned. Yeah.
The abandoned hotel with yeah, it was me. And that was Eric Roche. Eric was there, and Thomas was there.
Leeds,
Thomas Lee was there, and I don't think that one was Stuart, but I know it was Thomas. Was
Because
it?
there were two there.
Yeah, Jacques Stockzem.
Were you at both of them? Oh, was it Jack? Was it the one? Was it the last one that Eric did, or was it the one?
I went for the last one as well.
Yeah.
The last one was.
So you were at two. You were at two.
I was at two of them.
Yeah.
The second one was with Stuart. Stuart Ryan was there. Stuart. Eric.
I thought Stuart was there for the last one because I remember him having to take over.
The last one, yeah, but
he
the
had
first
to take
time
over the lessons in there.
Yeah,
there was Jack Stotson was there.
That one was the first one. The one with
Right.
Jacques.
Yeah.
And Thomas was there just hanging out.
That's the first one. Yeah, Thomas was at the first one. Yeah,
and that's when
definitely.
I met you.
Yeah.
And
But you were at the, but we were both at the second one as well, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember. And that was the first time I tried your guitars really. I tried it because Eric had one of yours.
Because I think I'd probably just made that first one for Eric then. Yeah.
Yes,
then
that was the bigger one.
No, the small one was the first one for Eric was a small. It was an OM size, and it was cedar and Indian rosewood.
Yes.
And that was one he used on the With These Hands album. Was mostly that guitar.
Yes.
So that would have been that would have probably been the first. I think that was the first one. He just got it. You think he'd really got it just a few months, not very long before that.
Interesting. And then the second time, I think I tried the same guitar a year later.
Yeah.
So it was 2003 and 2004, and he had been gigging like crazy, and the guitar had aged so nicely. The sound was
good
amazing.
scrapes on it and stuff.
Yeah, he's very good. He got me into scratching and like scraping the guitar completely. So that was great.
So the next the second one, the prototype guitar I made,
percussion one.
Was number 50. It had the first ever
yes
scratch patch.
I think. Lovely.
Well, I didn't call it a scratch patch then.
What do you call it then?
I don't know what I called it. It was because his Loudon was cedar, and he'd scratched this area, and it had gone all the way through, so it was about to go through and make a hole.
Yes.
And I'd actually had to glue a patch inside it, so you could keep on scratching. And it was. I don't think it ever quite got to the new wood, but it was close. You could almost push your finger through it.
Okay.
So that prototype one, it was still a cedar one to have that sound, but I stuck on because we wanted to have the. I thought, shall I make something that has like a deliberately has like ridges in it or something, so it's like a. And then I thought, well, no, the wood does it. The lines in the wood do it in the spruce or a cedar do it. And so I just thought, well, I'll just stick a bit of spruce on because it's much harder than cedar, and also it could be replaced if you did wear it through, rather than it wouldn't damage the actual guitar, it would just be damaging the bit of wood. So that one it was glued on, and then the next year Thomas Lee had one that something had been made for him that was stuck on like a scratch plate, and it was still plenty loud enough. I thought maybe the tape would make it quieter, the scratching, but it was fine. So after that, they've all been stuck on with like a tape, like a scratch plate.
Double-sided tape.
Yeah, sticky film stuff. So that was that number 50, my 50th guitar was that prototype that Eric had, which you saw.
And the first one was number.
It was. I'd have to look it up. It was probably number 36 or something like that.
Wow.
I think. Yeah. So it was. Yeah.
And now you said the last one you built was like number 170.
I'm up to about 180 something now. Yeah. I think I finished 179 or something completely. Yeah. And some of those are electric guitars and some classical 9-string guitars. So probably about 20, 25 or something are not steel string guitars. So
Okay.
I've made more than 150 steel string guitars now, over 20 years. So it's not that many, but
still,
it's quite yeah.
But
It's strange to see them all in a room together. That'd be
it'd be interesting. you could have a Benjamin family reunion, and everyone will bring the guitars.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Then you try one by one.
It'd be very strange.
Try from number one all
I
the
think
way.
I'd freak out. See all
See all of them in one place. So
this one is
tell me about
number 100 and what?
161.
161. So it's been here seasoning nicely before you came to collect it for a little while. But so this one is a JOM. Well, that's what I now call this shape. So it meaning a jumbo OM or jumbo orchestra model, and basically it's a similar type of shape to an OM, traditional Martin OM size, but it's bigger. So it's like a expanded version. And the name is actually something that Dana Bourgeois, a very famous American maker, coined. He called it a JOM, a jumbo OM. When I designed this, I didn't call it that. It was just a size, and then later on I thought, oh, well, that's a good name for it, so I just called it that. It's like for me, it's like a name that should be like a traditional a modern name for a certain type of guitar.
Okay.
So it has so the thing I would say so the OM was the first 14 fret guitar ever designed as a normal model, and it was designed for banjo players.
Oh.
Okay. Back in the beginning of the 20th century. So it had a 14 fret longer neck, had a narrower neck than most of the Martins that were available, and the orchestra was like and a lot of them were tenor guitars, had 4 strings.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the banjo is really important for steel string evolution in that before the banjo players wanted to start playing, so the banjo craze down, guitar craze up.
Okay.
Banjo players wanted to play the guitar, but they wanted to play how they knew how to play.
Okay.
So they wanted guitars that were more like a banjo. So that's what the tenor guitar was, American guitars which have 4 strings and they're tuned in fifths, I guess, and that was called an orchestral or orchestra model banjo, I think, the 4-string ones. So they were used for rhythm playing in jazz bands and stuff, I think. Okay. So the name orchestra model actually comes from banjo.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
World, and it was the first 14 fret guitar, and these days it's quite a small guitar, but at the time it was one of their bigger models.
Oh.
So as people have found basically that I would say that bigger steel string guitars have maybe a more balanced sound. The small guitars can sound great, but they have quite a particular sound that's quite strong in one frequency region, whereas when you make a steel string bigger, you can make it more balanced, maybe more versatile. So the OM model becomes a medium to small size now, from my outlook anyway. And so most of the guitars I make are bigger than an OM. However, the shape of an OM has there's particular proportions to an OM which tend to give you a particular kind of tonality. So when we're looking at choosing a guitar to be made, or me thinking about what I'm designing, then there's a lot of factors that you could say are the big choices in a guitar. I.e. the shape of the guitar, which often be called a model as well, and then the woods that you're going to use. Now, and then there's the whole structure, all the bracing and strutting and stuff, which is probably more important than either of those other things. But when someone chooses a guitar from a maker, they're usually choosing the model and the woods, and the maker's done all the developing of the other aspects. So an OM guitar, as I was saying, the overall size is now, I would call it a medium to small guitar. Originally it wasn't, but it is now compared to modern guitars. And it has what I would say a medium width waist. Okay. I.e. it's not a really cinched in tight waist like some shapes. So you get what often would be known as a jumbo shape now, a sort of Gibson or Guild style shape, where you've got quite a figure of 80 type shape, tight shape. So it might be quite wide here, but it's relatively narrow here. And then you get a dreadnought, which has a very flat waist. So that again, that's a traditional Martin size. and some Gibsons as well in a different version of that. And that has a very wide waist. Okay, and that difference in how wide or tight the waist is makes quite a big impact on the guitar's structure. I guess is the simplest word to use. So basically, the tighter the curves of the sides are, the more stiffness, that rigidity that puts into the guitar. Okay. So if you have wood in the sides that's quite flat and not very curved, that the flatter areas are much bendier for the given. However, depending on how thick they are as well, obviously, but relatively speaking, they're more flexible. Okay. So with this kind of medium width shape, you can see this shape has slightly flatter areas here, and it has a bit more flexibility in it. Now, very tight waisted with very tight curves, like a jumbo size, that is intrinsically stiffer. So the guitar has less give in it. It's stiffer. And a dreadnought, so they have the shape is quite a weak shape. So dreadnoughts actually, to compensate for this weaker shape, they have to be made quite solid. Oh, okay. Okay, so usually if you made a dreadnought really lightly built, it would be very bassy and loose. Oh. So one of the reasons why dreadnoughts can be quite good for flat picking and stuff is because you have to build them a bit tighter. And that gives you a good sound for bluegrass and flat picking. Okay. So the nice thing about the OM shape is it's not too tight, so it gives you slightly kind of more open and looser guitar. And you can use that to give a certain emphasis to to a guitar. So I use this shape to give a guitar that's not too direct sounding. It has a little bit more of a more open, slightly looser, a little more growl in the sound. So you can kind of overload it a little bit more easily than a real tight shaped guitar. But I compensate for the slightly looser shape by doing other things. For instance, I make this quite shallow, the body. I don't make a real deep body on my JOM, even though the width of it's about the same as a Martin Dreadnought actually. This width here. Okay. I make it quite shallow, more like an OM, like a small OM would be, and that helps focus the sound up, tighten it up a little bit, control the low frequencies a bit. And also it means I can build the soundboard so it's a little bit more controlled. So a little bit like a Dreadnought, where you can get a looser shape and you can have a more controlled soundboard and it sounds good. And that can be a good thing for low tunings. So it allows you to make a guitar that's got control but still sounds nice and open and free and lively. This slightly looser shape, again, I would counteract that often by using woods that aren't too bassy. So, for instance, for the way I build, and it's different for different builders, but the way I build guitars, mahogany tends to give a sound that's more mid-range strong. Okay. And I mean that in the sort of quite a broad mid-range. It's not. I don't mean just one. It's not very strong in one particular frequency. I mean it gives a lot of a broad frequency mid-range emphasis, and it doesn't sound super deep or super bright, but it has a bit of everything in the middle. Okay. And that's good with this shape because it means it doesn't get too bassy and honky and sort of low MIDI. It kind of keeps it focused. So the combination with this particular model of the overall size being, this is probably in a way one of my smaller models. I build a lot of ones that are a little bit bigger than this, but it's kind of a medium size in my whole range, and it's shallower. It's got woods that give so the Sitka spruce on the top on this. Again, it gives a nice sort of punchy mid-range without being too bassy or too metallic, and this leads this guitar to have to be really much a mid-range strong instrument. Now, mid-range means something different to everyone that says mid-range.
Yeah, exactly.
Mid-range covers most of the frequency range of a guitar. Really, it's all mid-range. Okay. Kind of. Yeah. And in a sense, what I'm saying is that rather than having the super metallic top end and the super deep bottom end, it allows you to hear most of the rest of it without those dominating into it. So this combination of woods tends to give what I would call a slightly brassy sound to the harmonic. So it's like bright but not metallic. The steel strings are always metallic, but it's not super crispy. It's like more brassy and sort of snappy, I suppose you could say. It's not quite the right word, but and then rather than having a super deep, dark bass, it's got more like a fatter, chunkier bass, which is all coming from the both woods that are giving a denser sort of mid-range and a controlled bass, and not too metallic, not too deep. So basically, you're ending up with a guitar that has a sweet mid-range, but with a nice brassy. When you hit it, it has like a presence to it. That's brassy is a word I like to use. That like a trumpet. Yeah. It's got that bite to it, which is rather than being super sizzly top end, it's more. It's a nice sort of crunchy. It's a bit like maybe like a Marshall amp or something like that.
Yeah, it does
has that kerrang.
Yeah, and I remember you were talking just now about what you call distortion, or how it's like the acoustic is like a harmonic amp. Yeah, or harmonic generation. There's the woods. So the woods of adding, if you make the woods the right thickness to allow them to do it, the woods are adding harmonic texture. These woods are adding mid-rangey, not too high frequency, harmonic generation. They're adding. They're not. It's not just the string. It's the wood producing that. The strings moving, making the wood move, and you're hearing the wood. You always hear the wood. You're not hearing the strings. The strings are. The way there's almost no sound produced by the strings. Interesting.
When you play an electric guitar, you're still hearing the body. The body's flapping. The strings on their own are nearly silent because they're so aerodynamic. They're not moving in the air, hardly any. When you can hear your strumming sound, that's the plectrum going click.
You're hearing the plectrum click.
You can hear the strings a little bit, but really they're deliberately to make strings sustain, to move for a long time. They need to be aerodynamic. They need to be able to slip through the air very easily. So these strings are like the opposite thing you want to make some loud noise. You need the area of the wood to fan the big area of air to make the sound that you hear. So you're always hearing the wood, and if you think you're hearing the strings, you're not. The strings are producing and making the wood vibrate. On an acoustic guitar, you are listening to the wood. It's like on an electric guitar, you are listening to the speaker cone.
Yes.
That's what you're hearing. That's what making the sound. That's why the speaker's so important in the electric guitar. The speaker's as important as the wood in the acoustic guitar, because you're listening to that. You're hearing that. So it's the wood. The sound's coming from somewhere else, from the strings or from the valves or whatever, and they're coming. But it's actually the thing that's actually moving is the wood. And you're hearing. That's what's making the air vibrate. On an acoustic guitar, those that harmonic distortion or harmonic generation, really what you're saying is the wood vibrates in sympathy with the string, but it's not producing an accurate version of the string. It's producing a very coloured and textured version of that. That's what you want. That's what makes it sound interesting.
Can you talk a little bit maybe about like the top or the struts or like the pitch or like anything? What I found at my that the customers have wanted over the years, partly because of players I've worked with and stuff, is that there's a certain functions that they're trying to get from steel string guitar, which are things that a lot of people are interested in now, or have been in the last decade or two. Playing fingerstyle on steel string, but not playing what you might call folk music or traditional music. Playing modern compositions using a lot of different tunings and using a lot of different techniques. I mean, especially when Eric Roche and other players like him came along, the techniques exploded. Also, amplification has changed a lot in the last 20 years since I started. Everyone that performs now performs plugged in, and you can now sound really good plugged in.
or you can sound really bad still.
Yeah, there's always the opportunity.
Yeah, there's always the opportunity to sound terrible. But I've tried to make guitars that work easily amplified. So I don't build electroacoustic guitars, but I build acoustic guitars that are designed to sound good plugged in.
Yes.
And when I say designed, it's been more of an evolution.
Okay.
Okay, so I know when I've made a particular guitar, one it sounds great but doesn't amplify very easily, maybe feeds back too easily or too bassy. So I've gradually found, what combinations work well. So this combination, this model, if you like, my customer Newton Ferrers, who plays live a lot and plays big venues. I made the first guitar, student of Eric Roche's, the first guitar I made for him is this model basically. It was an JOM Sitka mahogany. I hadn't made a Sitka mahogany JOM before. I thought about it and I thought this is the one I'll make him. I think it will work, and it worked. It was great plugged in, great in the studio. Worked. It just did everything. And maybe that was luck in my earlier days. It was just I thought about it, but it worked. What I hoped would happen happened. And so this model now, I make it this shape. I make it using this combination a lot because it's sensitive. It's a sensitive guitar, but not in the meaning that a lot of makers would say sensitive when they mean you hardly have to touch it to make it play. Okay. It's sensitive in that it will respond very much to how you play it. It's not, it will react to how you play it. So it doesn't do it for you. You've got to, you've got to do it. I'm not saying that means you have to play hard. I mean, that means you have to form the sound. But it will amplify easily. Which, maybe you could say if you make something that's very sensitive, i.e. you hardly have to touch it to play, that isn't going to amplify very well, probably.
Yes.
It's going to be too sensitive, so any sound coming back at it, it's going to cause it to vibrate and become, escalate into either a messy sound or feedback or boominess or whatever. So this combination gives a sensitive guitar, i.e. you can do tapping and all sorts of things and they come out loudly if you've got the technique. But it will still be controlled in a live setting and sound balanced in a live setting. And so, going round to your question, which was talk about maybe the other aspects of how it's built. So then the way it's strutted and the choices I made about how thick the timbers are and certain design choices and like how the neck's built inside the internal construction of the neck, those are all about achieving that. Okay, so achieving a guitar that's sensitive to the player, doesn't do it for you, but is sensitive. You can play differently, and you would change the sound completely by how you play. It's responsive in that sense rather than just touch it and it's you need. I hate guitars that are like that. You need one that you can push it. So, but you also need one that will play. You can play gently and it sounds good. So it's about headroom and about the dynamic quality mixed up with control. So basically, it's what I'm trying to make is guitars that are sensitive and controlled at the same time. So which is kind of, you could say, are opposite things, but they don't have to be. So it's learning what aspects to control. So most of the problems you'll get in a guitar that to get a balanced sound will be in the lower frequencies. So if you make a very lightly built loose guitar, it will be sensitive in the sense that you can play it gently and it will be relatively loud, but also it will be out of control usually. So, and that's often in the low frequencies. And actually having way too much low frequencies often it doesn't really help the sound anyway. You actually lose a lot of power in a guitar if it's very bassy. Because bass is we don't really hear bass very well. You feel it, but it's not, what you hear is your ears are really hearing the mid-range frequencies. So if you make a loose guitar, it can seem very sensitive, but actually it can be quite quiet, and also it can be, it will have problems. It will definitely have problems in an amplified setting. If something moves very freely in the lower frequencies, which is what a loose guitar will do, then it will almost certainly be moved very easily by sound waves coming back at it from amplification systems. So essentially what you're trying to do in producing a guitar that's controlled but sensitive is you're trying to control the lower frequencies, to put it very simply, but allow a lot of life in the higher, in the sort of mid and high frequencies. So, i.e., rather than lots of big movement like this, that's quite controlled, but there's lots of small movement going on.
Ah, okay.
Okay. So, and the way I actually build the whole guitar like that. So I don't really treat the guitar like a speaker cone and a box.
Okay.
I actually treat it like the whole thing. I treat in the same way.
Okay.
So I'm trying to make the whole guitar have all the little movements.
So everything from
The
the
back,
back and
the
sides,
sides, everything. But not have too much of the big out of control movements, or rather, those big out of control movements are controlled. They're there, but they're not tight, but they're controlled. So they're not lots of big peaks in the responses in the low frequencies. It's trying to get a balanced, a fairly quite neutral, balanced low frequency response, and actually making the whole instrument so it has a similar weighting, the front and the back, is very useful in that sense. If you can imagine a very rigid back and sides guitar with a relatively light soundboard, they tend to have very strong resonances at particular frequencies, because it's like you're kicking against a solid thing. Whereas if everything's got an elasticity and a give in it, it's like if you hit a strong resonance, it has a shock absorbing effect if you've got a bit more give in the whole guitar. So actually having the back, so my backs are not thick. They're not really thin, but they're what I'd always call it. Everything I do is a medium, something like that. That's every maker thinks that. But so the back is springy.
Okay.
And it's not floppy.
Okay, springy but not floppy.
Yeah. So actually, it's very elastic in terms of it's a resilient elasticity. So if I went too thin, it would just lose. It would be floppy. Okay. So it's going thin enough that it can do all those little movements, and bracing it and arching it enough that it does all the little movements, but it doesn't go out of control and go floppy. Okay. So if your back goes floppy, it sort of absorbs sound rather than helping, and also makes the whole guitar weaker. And on the soundboard, again, it's like it's about having a resilient rigidity that's also got a lot of resilient springiness in it. So it's tight, but not. The tightness isn't stopping it vibrating; it's actually helping it vibrate. So it's like a tense bow or something, it's that sort of restrained energy in it. And so, trying to make a guitar that's sensitive and controlled. I mean, to put it very simply, it's one of the things you're trying to do is make the thickness of the timbers be such that, if you can imagine inside the guitar, you've got if you're using conventional construction that I favour, which is basically a soundboard, which is whatever thickness, and then you've got struts, which are strips of wood that are generally narrow and tall. So they're like fins, if you like, on the back of the soundboard, and difficult to see. I haven't got any guitars I can show you at the moment, but if you're doing that, can you imagine there are gaps in between these? So you've got your relatively strong struts, bracing or reinforcing strips, and then you've got a gap in between them. Now, if you make your soundboards too thin, then that bridge in between two struts becomes weak and loses all its vitality. If you make it too thick, then you start locking everything together into one big thick bump, and it can't. You want that. So you're trying to hit the spot where it will move but have an overall resilience. So it'll have an overall strength, partly to do with the not deforming too much with time, but also to do with actually acoustic resilience. So it's like a again, as I was saying, it's like a bow that it takes energy in and stores it and then gives it out. It's got that fight, that tension in it. And if you make a top too thin, then that tension goes. If you make a top too thick, then you lock the whole thing together, and it ends up sounding very undynamic and compressed and lacking in harmonics and stuff like that. So I'm essentially trying to make my soundboard thick enough that it's really strong and resilient, and it can take the energy and give it back out. and it won't get loose and floppy with time too much. So if you make your top very thin, then you'll find that the soundboard starts to die, and that sounds like an exaggeration, but it really does happen. You know, a new guitar with a very thin top can sound pretty great, and then after a few years, a lot of your high frequencies start dying down.
Why does it die?
So when you play in a guitar, as everyone's found with a guitar that's built light enough that it will play. You know, if it's really solid, it'll maybe almost never play. But the guitar changes with playing. And I would use the analogy of exercise in the guitar, in that when you're playing it, you're constantly flexing it, and it actually loosens it up.
Okay.
So you actually the movement is working on the wood fibres, and you can feel it. The wood gets looser. Okay, so it gets less. It gets basically, you'll find that your resonant frequencies drop slightly. It gets looser and more. Not more bass isn't the right word, but it loosens up, and you can even feel like when if you sand the wood, it gets slightly warm. Soundboards get looser, and then when it cools down again, they tighten up again, and it's a lot like that. There's nothing mystical about it. It's a warming up of, so the more you flex something, it'll get more and more loose in that way of flexing. So the vibration, the playing in, it's like it exercises the guitar to work as a guitar and makes it sound better and better. Kind of, if you play it, it depends on the player where it sounds better. If you play well and sensitively, it will sound better after playing it. It will sound different. If you start off from where the soundboard's very thin, then it's like having a guitar that's already played in. You've got nowhere to go, so you just go looser, and you lose that resilience, that tension. So one of the reasons, for instance, I don't use, I very rarely use things like lattice strutting is because the strut, when you've got lots of joints in the strutting, you've got crisscross pattern, those joints are incredibly strong, and you generally have to make your soundboard quite thin, or else the guitar ends up too tight. For me, that's a choice I'm not willing to make. I want to have my top thick enough that it has a long life. So my techniques are relatively traditional because I don't want to. So I rather than using lots of small crisscross struts or whatever, I use a fewer number of bigger struts and a slightly thicker top. So you've got the balance of the two, how thick the top is and how many struts you've got, and whether they're jointed or not. So like a joint in two struts locks them together. So you can imagine two struts on their own, they're relatively flexible.
Yes.
You lock them together and they
tighter.
For no extra weight, they're a lot stiff. They're a lot stiffer. So that's what the X brace is doing in a guitar. Yeah. So the joint in there, it makes those two very long struts. It locks them together so that they can't bend like this so easily, particularly near the joint. They're locked. So it keeps them vertical, stops them buckling. So if you're talking engineering terms, it's about buckling and torsional strength. So torsional strength is a twisting strength. So if you imagine you've got a long strut, you can twist it. I'm just going to jump off camera and get it. I'll show you.
Sure.
We're on live here.
You can, for mine, right, you can actually stop and start again so that it's two separate video files.
Okay.
Yeah, because if it's too long on one, sometimes the audio goes out of sync.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it started again. I just press stop, then it started again, is it? Oh, I think.
Press stop. And then
It started again.
Okay, that's fine.
So I guess it should be okay.
Okay. So yeah.
So, imagine this is a strut. So inside the guitar we've got pieces of wood so this is thinner than a strut would ever be. I mean, it's metal. But if you imagine these struts, they have a stiffness this way that will help control the guitar in this movement like this. But then they have, if you have quite a narrow strut, they have a torsional strength, so a twisting strength. Now, the way if you make your struts in a guitar so they're tall but thin, like this ruler is, one of the reasons I got the ruler out. Then they have quite a lot of strength pushing in this direction, I mean, they have none in this direction really, but that not much. But that's you're not going to the forces. I mean, that's not really well, kind of happening. There's complicated stuff going on, but what they have is they can twist like this quite easily. So you can imagine making a strutting that's relatively high. It controls the bass evenness, but then narrow. It has a lot of it's quite flexible in this twisting sense. So if you can imagine there's a soundboard joined onto that, it means it's easier for the soundboard to move around like this.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so the whole soundboard is quite controlled up and down like that, but it can move like this still a little bit. Okay. And so essentially the main thing I'm doing is something very simple that most guitar makers know, which is pointy struts. They control, so if they're relatively high, but that should be triangular cross section normally, or sometimes depends on the people who do different things. What you're doing is you're allowing it to be more flexible, like this, twisty.
Okay.
And that allows the whole soundboard to come to life in those smaller movements, which are what gives all of the interest in the sound and the life, the vitality, but keeps the control. So that, to put it really simply, but actually, to bring it down to the essence of it, that's what I'm doing. I'm making certain choices to mean that I can have a soundboard and other bits that are a certain thickness. I'm making the whole guitar so it all does what I'm talking about, these smaller movements rather than all the big ones too much. But I'm making sure they can do the small movements. So like my back and my sides are fairly thin. I don't do things like laminated side and stuff like that. And other reasons for that. But I try and make everything come to life, but be controlled. Okay. And then you have a guitar that's sensitive, and the whole thing, when you play a note, the whole thing starts vibrating and producing sound. But when you do a low tuning or you play hard, it doesn't get out of control.
Ah, okay.
So you don't get funny big strong resonances at one note or another. You don't get too much bass, and that's the idea. I guess we wanted to talk about what I'm trying to do. That's putting it really simply, but the essence of what I'm trying to do. There's lots of other choices in there which will affect the type of attack you get in the sound and that sort of thing. So we were talking earlier on about, I was saying I've changed how I'm building my guitars.
Like how did it start, and what are the changes over time from the time I tried Eric's one and maybe. Yeah. So I tried Eric's one, and then I tried Eric's second one, and then I tried one of Mike's guitars. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe
there's definitely there were. I've always been trying different things, and not all, and sometimes for a particular purpose, and sometimes just to see. I don't usually do things that are really different. Apart from occasion, I make what I would usually then call a prototype guitar. So like Eric's second guitar, which was a prototype guitar because I built it for percussion players who are actually hitting the guitar. I thought I'm going to make something that doesn't break. I'll put extra things in there and to support it. That's the only guitar I made like that really, because I decided it restricted the sound too much, or I wasn't happy with.
Is that the one that Thomas had, and then it went?
No, there was another one.
That was another one.
Yeah, that's another. So I did make another percussion prototype, but that actually didn't have any reinforcing extras. It had a different layout. I'll talk about that in a minute. But Eric's one had some patches in here and stuff. It had the first scratch patch, which was to stop him wearing through the top. So it was like it was a reinforcing patch, and it had some. Because the place everyone breaks their guitars is down here. Yeah. So if you imagine if you're hitting your guitar downwards the most likely direction of a crack is along the grain. It's very difficult to break it across the grain, but very easy to break it. It's down the line. Okay. And in the corner here, you've got a solid corner here, and the wood just on it. It's like snapping it over an edge. Okay. Yeah. So it's like having a stiff edge and you just go snap. Okay. And so I was trying to stop that happening, and now I build most of my guitars with other ways of stopping that, rather than adding something. What I do is one of the things I do is I use the inside this area here. There's what's called a lining, which is the bit that goes in the corner of the guitar to make it easier to glue the side to the front or the back to the side. In this area I use a softer type of wood, so I use basswood line just in this area here, and that wood is quite soft. Okay. So it has a bit of a give in it. Okay. So it's not such a sharp, hard edge there. I mean, I often use mahogany in the rest of it, which is harder and gives you more of a sharp edge that you could snap off. So I use quite a liberally sort of soft wood here inside, so that you don't have such a definite cracking point. And also, one of the normal struts that I put across here, I just position it so it comes up into a position that it's stopping that cracking over the edge. It's in the right place to stop that. Ah. So rather than adding something, I just repositioned things and made certain choices, using a more rather than having to add stuff that was restricting the guitar. I just repositioned things.
And that's from just observing where the damage is.
Yeah, exactly. It's knowing exactly where the damage is. You know, where everybody who is doing that too hard. Yes. You can still break my guitars. People do sometimes, but it's try not to. But it is often there that breaks. Okay. Yeah, because it is the weak point, and you know, so I decided to make it tough there rather than strong. You know, so it has a bit of give in it and stuff. So I mean basically there's hundreds of little choices in a guitar design, and then there's the actual shaping of everything, which, you know, when you're working by hand, shaping particularly struts by hand, I have an overall approximate shaping and size that I often do, but it's not a definite thing, and I change it all slightly for each guitar, because I'm testing the piece of wood while I'm working on it to see if I've got the stiffness right. Ah, okay. Okay, and because every bit of wood's different, even from two slices from the same plank, you know, two pieces of brace wood, they'll be different. You feel them, there'll be different stiffness. So the only way to know whether you've reached the point that you want to be at, so exactly how rigid or how much give there is in it, how elastic it is by testing it. And you can test some things literally you know, like an engineer might, you know, do I don't know, some people do what you might call a deflection test, where they maybe have the soundboard and they put a weight on it and they see how much far it moves with a weight on, a simple test. Okay. I use my hand, you know, I could do that, but it's the thing is that most of the decisions are actually very complicated, because the shape's not a symmetric, you know, it's a funny shape, and it's just comparing maybe what other bits of wood from other guitars you made. So I do just, like, you know, I'll flex things by hand. Okay. And I'll, you know, for instance, now my main test is I see how stiff we are from here to here. Oh, okay. I'll grab through the sound tool, and when I'm thicknessing the soundboard, I'll feel how flexible that is. And the reason that's such an important thing is because that's the main bit that's got the tension of the strings on. That's where all of your sound energy, vibration energy is going through that bit. So, and that stiffness of that is like the crucial part of the soundboard response. So, like how stiff the guitar is across the grain, which, so you get a variation in stiffness along and across with different pieces with different species. The cross grain stiffness is important, but you can control that with struts to some extent. You know, so maybe you might make your struts a little bit higher or something like that if it's a little bit weaker across the grain. But the strength along the grain here, which has got so much force on it from the strings twisting the bridge, the strength of the actual wood, the soundboard itself, not the strutting, is really important there. So that's my crucial. I go, is this bit, you know, is it too stiff or is it just right? And that's one of the main tests I do. When you then start to glue all your reinforcing struts on, then it actually becomes quite stiff, and it's quite difficult to test it with your hands. So I actually do a lot more what you call tap toning, and what I do there is I'd actually hold the soundboard to my fingertips, and we're using a knuckle. I tap on different parts of it, and what I'm doing there is most of the time I'm actually hitting particular braces, struts, pieces of wood on there, and I'm listening to how they sound. I'm not worried about what the note or the pitch of the resonance I'm hearing. What I'm listening to is the type of sound. Okay. So when to get all these little complicated movements I'm talking about, you can hear that the soundboard's doing that when you get used to it. So when it's too stiff, then it sounds like what I'd say knocking on a door, right? You know, it's like that hard sound. If you went too far, it would sound like cardboard. You know, it sounds like fun. Okay. Now, in between those two extremes, you're trying to find the sweet spot that you think you want to do, and that's when it starts to kind of thrum. You know, you kind of get a busy. You know, it doesn't sound hard. Okay. Or you start getting a little bit. You know, you don't want to go too far from. You know, you need a little bit of tightness in there, and it's finding that. It's listening to that tone. And it's very much like playing the guitar. You're kind of playing the wood and hearing the tone you get, and seeing if it feels right, it feels alive and feels, you know, interesting in the sound and everything. And so that way I can actually find out whether, you know, maybe I've left one of the struts a bit too tight, so that, you know, one strut's got a nice springy, rich, but not too loose, and another one's like still really tight. I'll think, I'll just shave that strut down a bit smaller. Okay. So it's basically going round and round in circles, juggling until all of the struts are like feeling like they're coming to life when you tap on each one. And it's not an exact science at all. But you can feel that change, and they're all interacting with one another. So part of it is just experience of what normally guitar would be like. But it's when you're thinking, is it too tight still? You can tap and you can go, yeah, that sounds, you know. That sounds too like hard and tight still. I want it to become more give, more squishiness in that. And essentially that's the main reason for making a handmade guitar if we're talking about response. Obviously there's other reasons for making handmade guitars in terms of uniqueness and customization, all those sort of things. But if we're talking about musical response purely, which is my interest, then that being able to literally test each aspect of the soundboard while you're making it and bring it to what you think is your preferred optimum, you can't really do that in any other environment apart from by holding it and you know, using little planes and chisels and stuff and sanding and stuff to bring it all to life. Whether or not, you know, the difference is, it's arguable whether how different it is between a good factory-made guitar and a well-voiced handmade guitar. Some people will tell the difference. Some people prefer the factory one. Depends what you want. Depends what you want. You know, what you're looking for. I'm making guitars that I like. You know, I like my guitars more than any other guitars I play because they're my taste. Okay. You know, they should. You know, it should be. If you're not making your favourite guitars, then you're doing something. You know, doing something wrong, maybe. But so I like my guitars a lot because I've made them how I like them. But I'm also listening to what my customers want, definitely. And my tastes in music have come along with my customers. You know, I mean, my background in steel string is definitely things like Joni Mitchell and stuff like that. And I would consider Joni Mitchell to be the grandmother of modern fingerstyle. I mean, she started the whole thing really. She didn't care about the rules. Yes, exactly. She had hundreds of tunings. She played whatever the tuning she liked. She played any technique she liked, and she's probably the main reason I played acoustic guitar and not just electric when I was a teenager. You know. Interesting. Definitely. I'd say she's absolutely crucial in the fact that I make steel string guitars. Wow. Okay. So when modern fingerstyle, I'm going to call it, came along as a new sort of genre on its own, it all made sense to me. Because it was just a legacy from Joni Mitchell, and you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash and that sort of stuff. But and you know, Leo Kottke, etc., etc. But Joni Mitchell was the person that threw the traditional rule book out of the window. She was the first. For me, she was the first person that did that fully. Although I'm sure you can argue about that all day long. But you know, but the relation, I guess the relationship is that her direct lineage to Michael Hedges, if you listen to his early stuff, it's almost like you know, he was listening to Hedge era and that sort of era of Joni Mitchell, and there's so many similarities, deliberate similarities.
Yeah,
you know, he was very influenced by Joni Mitchell, and that's where you know all comes through.
I'm curious about I guess because you've made. Because you made guitar, I mean, you made the guitar for Eric, and you did the percussion thing for Thomas. I guess that's the one that Alex.
Well, I made a prototype a guitar which I lent to Thomas. Yeah. So that was the first one. That was the first Scoop Cutaway guitar I made.
Oh, that's the first Scoop one.
Yeah. So that was a prototype. I did it with so it had an unusual. It didn't have any reinforcing patches in it, but it had rather than having a normal X-ray, so that'd be two. That'd be one strut like this, one strut like this, and with a joint here, about here in front of the bridge. Okay. It actually had two here and one here, or it might have been the other way around. I can't remember. So it actually had it was like two smaller ones and one big one.
Okay.
So what the reason for doing that, I think, was to my thinking at the time was that it had two main struts that came out here and went either side of the waist, where I was worrying about breaking going on. Yeah, so I did. So that was like an intermediate solution. I was trying to. I think, well, I'm going to do something quite different to normal, but it will still be normal struts. It won't be like extra patches and stuff. I put in some big patches of wood and stuff in Eric's prototype, I think. And then when I'd done that, I realised that really, because it had two joints, it really stiffened the guitar. Okay. And I was, you know, I found it was over probably too much. Okay. So I realised that I could do exactly the same by just using one of the normal small struts here and the normal X-brace. So I didn't need to do as much as I thought. So
it's kind of an evolution of trying to solve the problem.
I tried to solve a problem which I then solved in a much. Well, I didn't solve, but I just changed the layout slightly of a more normal style guitar to do the same things that I'd been thinking of doing. Yeah.
Very cool. So I guess when we were I guess emailing or talking, because we've known each other for many years. So maybe anything that you thought about in terms of, because you know how I play it, and you know kind of I do the jazz thing, I do the fingerstyle thing. Were there any particular considerations or things that came across?
Like, I mean, it's I guess I build. I've got quite a big range of models that I can build, but there are only a few that I build most of the time. And when I'm asking somebody what they want, it's actually probably everybody I build for. They could probably be catered for on one level. They could be catered for with maybe 3 or 4 of the combinations I do. Okay. From my point of view, not from their point of view. You know, I'll be thinking about what situation they're going to be playing in. So, are you going to be played amplifying? Are you going to be amplified? Or, you know, is that important, or is it sometimes, or never? Okay. If amplification is very important, then I'd often, for instance, build a mahogany guitar, amplified guitar. Okay. Because it's naturally easier to make a more balanced sounding guitar amplified, particularly if you're going to have a microphone inside it. Mahogany body guitars generally work better because there's less reflection and stuff going on inside the body, so internal mics sound good inside mahogany guitars usually. Then there's the aspect of what tuning someone will play in. So if you're playing in, if you need your guitar to cope with low tunings, then you need tightness in the guitar so it doesn't go slack and loose when you go into low tuning. Now, if you build a small guitar so that it's tight enough for low tunings, then it will sound pretty awful in tight tunings. It'll sound really tight. Okay. Whereas if you build a big guitar, tight enough for low tunings, if you go into standard tuning, it will still sound fine. Okay. It will sound a little bit tighter, but it will be okay. So bigger guitars are more versatile, definitely, from my feeling style. And then the other aspect is the whole idea of what they want, why they want it. So sometimes people want something that does a particular musical job. Other times they they are interested in how the woods look and all that sort of stuff, which is all all part of it. And it really is a question of priorities for a customer. So I try to get an order of, if they don't know, I mean most customers don't know what they want, they really don't, and they go, I don't know what I want. I ask questions, so I say, well, what do you think you might want, and what do you think what are you expecting that to do for you? And often they can't answer that, but then I say, well, how do you play? And that's really, I'm asking about tunings. If I can see someone play, I can see how hard they play. So like dealing with someone who plays very gently or uses very light strings, something like that, it makes it more difficult to if someone can play the guitar with a strong, not necessarily a loud tone, but a strong tone, then it's easier for the maker to make it good, make it work for the player. But I try to look for a priority list, and for a lot of people that's like really the priority is versatility, because they're going to do all sorts of things.
Of course.
Rarely do I make a guitar for someone that just plays tap style, percussion guitar. Almost never. Even my customers that are well known for doing that, they play all sorts of things. And most of my customers who are playing very varied music. So I certainly don't think of my guitars as very, very specialised for one style of music, even though they're associated, fairly strongly with percussion playing, whatever you want to call it. They're not. Most of my customers do not just play that. They play it, and they may have found me through that genre, but they may not play that genre at all.
Interesting.
So it's almost. I mean, I think we were talking about this earlier on, but almost, I would say what I'm trying to do with my guitars is that they will cope with more extreme things and work. They'll continue to work. So, you've been playing this in standard tuning quite a bit. A lot of my customers will never play in standard tuning. Some of them are only playing standard tuning. And with the right strings on, for the way you want to use it, then I would very, very much hope that my guitars will do both and work well for both. So, if someone says I just play in standard tuning, then that would often mean that I would. I might be more open in. I wouldn't go like, I think you should really go for this or that. I'd go, well, any of my models would be fine. If someone's like doing more extreme things where really the strings are getting very loose and they need to be, really the build of the guitar is very important, then I might go, right, this, you've got to go for maybe this or this choice will work, and the others will be like, might get out of control if you try and do that with them. So I mean, I think with your one, I think we talked through. I mean, basically, what you've ended up with is one of my classic models, and I think that's really what we said. I think. Yeah. I was like, well, here we came. I think we came to a point where like, these are my favourite models that I think are my best combos, and you went and you said, well, let's go for that one because that sounds good, and if we'd gone for one of my other versions, it would have been, I mean, maybe say for instance, this is one of my favourite models for mahogany and Sitka. If you said I want a Cocobolo guitar, like a heavy rosewood, that particular big warm sound, I'd have gone, well, I don't know if the JOM's not the right shape for that one, so we go for a different shape which will suit that particular wood, or we can, if you want that shape and you want that wood, we'll do it in a different way, so it's really just a to and fro with every customer. You just go, well, here are my recommendations, and it's but I always do that after someone's told me enough information. and yeah, hearing someone play is the best way to know, because you can go, yeah, right, they really lay into it. We've got to make a guitar that's just going to take that, or they're so gentle. We've got to make a guitar that's going to respond to that. I mean, these days I actually try not to respond too much to my suppositions about the player. I don't, because often when you experience someone playing, they will not play how they normally play, because they're like feeling shy or whatever. And that's the worst thing, is like you hear someone do something and you think, oh, I've got to make a really guitar that oh no, it's got to work. And then they come in and they play something completely different when they come and collect the guitar. You think, oh, they didn't want to do that. I don't think that's really ever happened, but that's what you fear. You can see that could be. If you made a. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, now I have my style of building that I've evolved, and I try to keep to what I know works, rather than be really swayed by a customer who I'm worrying they just want one of. They want one of my guitars. I'm thinking, oh, I've got to change it all to make it suit them. I don't do that now so much. I tend to go, well, look, this is my way of doing it. This is the one I would go for, rather than like trying to reinvent what I do all the time. Because then if you change too many things for particular customers, then you can lose sight of some other important things. So now I'm confident that my guitars are sensitive enough for any player of any hard, if I don't want to make my guitars any more sensitive than they are, because then other things go wrong.
Awesome.
So if someone's a really gentle player, they'll, my guitar will still sound nice. It won't be like massively loud if they're playing really gentle. But well, actually, I have this. I'm pleased with the sensitivity of my guitars. It's for me. It's you won't get much loud. You might get a more kicky response, or it's fast, but I don't like that sound. I want a slightly slower attack, and that gives that vocal melodic quality to the guitar. That's what I'm looking for. As an electric guitar player as well as an acoustic guitar player, I like that sustain and that little slower attack to it, where you get it's not all over in a split second. It's got some body, some sustaining body to it, and if you start playing around with lots of things, then you start losing some essential things. So I really, I build in my style now.
If it's blinking,
if it's red,
as long as it's red, right?
As long as it's red,
it should blinking.
Be... Yeah, it's still recording.
Okay.
I think. Beautiful.
No, it's usually when a guitar's finished, it's like out the door.
Yeah,
and I hardly get to know them.
Yeah.
So I haven't I've played this one.
I guess the thing I'm curious, because like the American guitars like Martins and stuff, right? They're very I don't know the right term for it, but they don't have a reverby sound. It's very dry.
Dry sound. And
then when I play when I play a Loudon or one of the modern fingerstyle guitars, they tend to sound reverby.
Yeah.
Or more like the sound. Yeah, I mean that's what. Could you talk a little bit about that? I'm always curious. Like, what makes that happen? Is it the construction, or is it what's the story with that?
So, I mean, you can literally get reverb in the sense that you get. Reverb in a hall is a reflection of sound. So, if you think about, you get cathedral reverbs and room reverbs and stuff, and those are partly about how the length of time that the reflection takes to come back, if you like, or occur, and you're also talking about how this sort of frequency range of that. So like maybe a cathedral echo reverb is a very bassy reflection, and with a long time to come back, because you're talking about walls that are a long way away and big amount of air that has a low frequency, or distant walls that have low frequency standing waves and stuff. Now, inside a guitar body, are there reflections like that? I honestly don't know. My suspicion is not much.
Okay.
Okay, so but when you hear like a Cocobolo guitar, which is one of the heaviest, densest, one of the densest rosewoods I use, they do sound like they got reverb on. Resonator guitars, metal-bodied resonator guitars, they sort of have a clang like it's almost like a spring reverb.
Yeah, it does sound like a spring reverb.
So, but is that a reflection in the sound? I don't think so. I think the distances are too close together. Everything's too flexible, and it's like. I think what you're hearing is a bit more like hitting a gong or something. You know, it's like those. So it's more like when you hear those, you know, a cymbal, you hear that crash of metallic quality. So some of the very dense roses, for instance, they are literally glassy. I.e., when you tap them, they sound like a pane of glass. You know, just got bong. You know, and when they're thinned down a bit and they become more flexible and they're controlled with the struts, rather than just going dong like a big sheet of glass, it's smaller movements going on, but it's the same effect.
Okay.
And I think you're hearing it's more like almost like a gong or something going. It's not going crash, but it's going clang almost.
Okay.
And so for instance, if you make your, as I was talking about earlier about thicknesses of woods being very important for some of the way they produce, you know, you'd call these overtones. Most people call them overtones. So what they are is overtones is basically sound that you can hear that the guitar is producing that isn't quite, it's triggered by the strings, but it's not directly related to the strings in a sense. And you could argue that all of the harmonic colour in the guitar is overtones, so it's not really a useful term maybe. But so I don't think you're hearing reverberation in the sense that you're not hearing echo, you're not hearing a reflection. But what you are hearing is you're hearing the wood doing and making its own noise. Okay, so so some woods make very little noise, okay, and if you make your back very thick, then it will make less noise, or it might make one sort of simple noise at a particular frequency, which sometimes can even be what we call a wolf note, so it's just like a really strong boost or cut at a certain frequency. So with with factory-built guitars, generally speaking, you have to build safely. So you have to make them strong enough, whatever the woods are. So if you're building to fixed dimensions, you have to make sure that they're strong. So basically, it means that a lot of the guitars will be on the heavier side, they're built more stiffly to be safe, so they don't bend in half with the string force on them. So on average, most factory-built guitars will be what you might call overbuilt, and that would be, which is again, it's not really a useful term, but they're on the heavier build side usually, and that means you'll get less overtones probably, usually. So and also often the woods maybe lower quality. What does that mean? It means they're probably not as sound transmitting. So maybe they're floppier, they're softer, so they're more likely to. You know, we were talking before about when you make a piece of wood too thin, it sounds more cardboardy, so it just has a sort of thud rather than any resonance. So low quality materials, so they're very bendy or soft, can be like that. You tap them and they just go. So you can imagine whatever sound you play at them or send through them doesn't really make them do very much. They're just floppy. You know? So if you've got high quality materials where the maker's chosen them because they're relatively very stiff and strong, those also tend to be loud and resonant woods. So i.e. when you put sound into them, they're very efficient, and they will use a lot of the energy for movement rather than just absorbing it and going thud. Okay, so better quality timbers will tend to produce more overtones
Okay.
if the thicknessing is right. If it's too thick or too thin, then you can go out of that zone.
Okay.
And you can make, you can make good materials sound bad, well, not bad, but less interesting. It's probably the quality of the materials and hopefully the skills of the makers who are getting the most out of them. However, it's a tasting. Whether you want extra overtones, that's taste. I mean, it's whether you want you might want a dry sound. If you're making a guitar for a bluegrass style, maybe the last thing you want is lots of overtones.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, for fingerstyle, modern fingerstyle solo guitar on it, so if you're playing with other instruments, you want to, it's like mixing a record. You want narrow sounds that sit with the other instruments.
Exactly.
If you're playing solo, you want big, complicated sounds.
Yes.
So, I would say I build solo guitars for solo playing mostly. So I'm looking for maximum interest on its own on the guitar.
Exactly.
And that's down to thicknessing of, all those things I was talking about before.
Yeah.
So it's about choices about how thick or thin bits of wood are and the quality of the timber.
Awesome.
So that's what I'm saying about there's like if I was going to go and buy if I wanted to buy a traditional bluegrass guitar, I might go and buy a Martin rather than go to a boutique hand-built dreadnought maker, because the Martin will have the classic sound, hopefully, that all the classic tunes are written on. They were written because the guitars sounded like that.
Exactly.
If you're playing a modern fingerstyle piece, then that sort of sound might not be the right sound.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or it might be.
Depending who was playing the guitar.
And what tuning you're in. Like we were talking about earlier on, where Michael Hedges used a dreadnought, Martin dreadnought, to play a lot of his.
He was playing low tunings as well on the dreadnought.
Yeah, so the reason the dreadnought didn't sound like a bluegrass guitar was because he was stringing it completely differently with heavy strings tuned very low.
Oh yeah.
And he played with his fingers. And that sort of tighter, what you might think of as a sort of tighter bluegrass instrument. Came into its own as a low-tuned guitar with heavy strings on. It worked, certainly. There's no simple answers to any.
Of course.
I bet you everyone's listening to something different when they're playing the same guitar, and that's why all these words for woody and whatever the overtones. I bet you everyone has a different idea of what all of those things mean, and it's I think actually some electric guitar terminology is quite useful for acoustic analogy. It's quite a useful analogy. So for instance, we were talking about this earlier as well. Say you DI your electric guitar, you plug it straight into a mixing desk. Like maybe Nile Rodgers did on the Chic records.
Yeah. Straight
into a really good desk preamp. Now that's a really different sound to any amplifier you've ever heard.
Yes.
He makes it sound great, but you wouldn't want to play blues on that.
Yeah, definitely not.
It's like a small sound, but nice, sweet, small sound, which is perfect for that style of playing. And if you make a guitar that's like maybe everything's the back and the front really thick, so it will sound a bit like a DI electric.
Yes.
Now, if you make a guitar where your front and your back and whatever are very thin, then it might sound a bit like a tweed amp with the speaker about to disintegrate after 50 years. It might sort of sound good, but it might fart out. Be all messy and gnarly. Or you might build something that has like if you think about Fender amps, the blackface Fender era, where you've got the best clean amps, the nicest sounding clean amps ever made. They sound sweet and clear and bright, but they sound interesting. They sound lovely. That might be a real nice guitar, but it will have a nice sound. It's not gnarly. It's not aggressive. It's nice. Whereas you might play a Marshall, which is always gritty and grainy and slightly aggressive sounding, or very aggressive sounding. it will make you play a different kind of music, and that's about harmonic content and balance. So you've got less bass, more harmonics. So like the Fender Blackface, you've got very few harmonics, but you've got nice smooth warmness in there. So it's not got a lot of brassy mid-range or anything. Marshall, you know, it's all about that gritty, bright upper mids. Same with acoustic guitars. I mean, maybe this is a little bit of a Marshall.
Yeah, it feels more.
If you hit it hard, it's got the. I'll do it.
Yeah, you do it.
Well, it's got those on the. It's got that.
Yeah.
But it's you know, and when you're playing gently, it's got maybe more chimey, more harmonics in the sound. So rhyming super clean. It's not clean. It's a slightly dirty.
Yeah.
It's a slightly dirty guitar. This
Interesting.
one. And that's what those woods are giving. And the thicknessing of the woods, but it's giving that dirty sound in a good way.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you play that, it's just like a Marshall amp. If you play it gentle and it sounds clean and bright and sparkly, you hit it snarls.
Yeah.
And it's very much like that with this sort of, this sort of model of guitar. So that's why it will sound different with different players. So if you're a gentle player, it will sound clear and sparkly. If you're a harder player, it will sound growly and fat and meaty.
Exactly like the way a tube amp will respond.
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly. It's really the same thing that's happening.
I love the comparison.
The bass sound of it is a trebly sound, if you like. So like a Marshall, it's a trebly preamp, if you like, in there, which you can. And then you've got the thing that you're kind of overdriving, or rather exciting with vibration in this case. When you give it that, if you hit it hard enough with that trebly sound, then it brings out all the trebleness gets squished, and the mid range all comes out, and it becomes a big fat sound.
Nice.
And it's very much the same mechanism, but happening
on an acoustic guitar
with wood rather than valves and speakers and stuff. And it's so you can make a high headroom clean amp, be like playing through a high watt or something, a clean 100 watt amp, which however hard you play it always sounds clean. Or you can make something that's like just on the edge of breakup all the time. And then you can make amps that don't work very well and guitars that don't work very well, where you just they're too bassy and soggy, or they're too clean and clear. So it's very much like, I do think about it like that in this.
And that makes sense. I mean, I think that's the best, because it responds like that, and I think that's why I like your guitars, because it has that, if I play lighter, it sounds like a nice, clean and velvety or silky sound, and then when you dig in, you get a lot of character in each note.
Exactly. That's entirely what I'm looking for, because for me, if the guitar doesn't respond, that's a response rather than sound.
That's response.
Yeah, it's response. Yeah, it's an answer to your playing.
Yeah.
If the guitar doesn't answer to your playing, then you put it down,
And that's why I guess some guitars, when I try them, they sound boring because they don't respond that well. They just have this one sound.
Yeah, they do what they do, and you might love that one sound.
Yeah.
And so it depends what you're looking for, doesn't it? It depends what kind of expression you're looking for. So
Cool.
There we go.
Thanks so much, Nick.
That
has been highly educational, and it's awesome. Thanks, Yin. And I think we're good. So thanks for watching, guys. Signing off from Nick Benjamin and myself and Lewes.